Where would Horrible Histories be without its cast? We can talk about the show's unexpectedly radical politics all we want, but the truth is that the show wouldn't have been half as good without its amazing cast. Fans affectionately call them the Six Idiots. Matthew Bainton, Simon Farnaby, Jim Howick, Bill Wilband, Martha Howe Douglas, and Lawrence Rickard all make regular appearances in the first 5 Horrible History series. And when the original cast decided to move on to new projects, the six stuck together to continue making us laugh. But in all their post-Horrible Histories projects, the Six Idiots have kept true to their roots by incorporating some sort of historical inspirational elements. Their most historical so far is their 2015 film Bill, about an up-and-coming Shakespeare who is trying to make his big break in the London theatre scene when he unwittingly gets caught up in the King Philip II of Spain's plot to murder Queen Elizabeth of England. So why don't we look at how they put the past on comedy film without the risk of anyone coming to tell them off for being inaccurate? This video idea was kindly sent in by one of my lovely subscribers who asked me to review the film Bill. So let's not waste any more time and get on with this far too in-depth historical review of a not so strictly accurate adaptation of William Shakespeare's early career.
That London is not gonna know what hit it! People will remember the name Shakespeare 20 years from now!
The early 1590s were a part of the 7-year period of Shakespeare's life that some scholars refer to as his lost years. Official records tell us that William Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway in 1582, and they had a daughter in 1583, and then twins in 1585. But after that, we don't know much about what the Shakespeares were up to in the same way that we don't know much about the personal lives of most ordinary families in a 16th century Stratford. But that all changed when Shakespeare appeared on the London theatre scene as a rising playwright with a theatre group, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and you've probably been subjected to learning about the rest of his life story at school. The first written record of Shakespeare working as a playwright was in 1592 by Robert Greene in his satirical pamphlet called Groat's Worth of Wit, which makes fun of people on the London theatre scene, and readers were meant to guess which person the entries refer to. Trust them not, for there is an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you. And being an absolute Johannes factotum, he is in his own conceit the only Shake seen in a country. An excellent subtle pun there, Robert. Everyone will have a hard time figuring out who that refers to. So we know that somewhere between 1585 and 1592, Shakespeare went from your local Stratford glove-making family to an established playwright who was starting to make the other university-educated writers fear his audacity of being a simple actor daring to actually write the plays himself, instead of staying in his lane as an actor. But how he did that, we have no idea, until those 6 idiots came in to fill in those mysterious 7 years with their film Bill. Bill takes place at the end of a turbulent century in English history, when Elizabeth I has established her place on the throne despite a series of succession crises and struggles between the Catholic and Protestant churches. After his defeat in the Spanish Armada, Philip II of Spain, the fictional one that is, has come up with a new plan to conquer England and turn it towards Catholicism, the assassination of Queen Elizabeth I. Unfortunately for him, Elizabeth is well used to attempts on her Protestant throne, so she has a secret network of spies and agents ready to foil any plots. That is until an unexpected figure gets caught in the mix. None other than a young Bill Shakespeare who has travelled to London to make a big break in the theatre scene. Today's image of William Shakespeare might be as a playwright genius who wrote serious and worthy plays about the condition of humanity, that we must all suffer through reading for school exams or sit through at the local theatre. But Matthew Bainton's Bill Shakespeare is nothing like that. He's passionate, eager and slightly naive, and he needs to prove himself against the odds. He's just been kicked out of his band while his wife has zero faith that his writing thing will work out.
It's not you.
It is you.
It is you.
And his timing isn't great because the plague is raging in London again. Over 1592 to 3 there was an outbreak of plague in London that claimed nearly 20,000 people and forced the Parliament to order the closure of theatres and public houses. And yes, this is the 1590s, which still predates the plague doctor costume. This portrayal of Shakespeare undercuts the, let's be real, slightly pretentious and gatekeepy way that he's interpreted today. As we know from our discussion of the anti-establishment undertones of Horrible Histories, the 6 idiots are well experienced in subverting glorified figures for laughs. But this interpretation of early career Shakespeare as passionate but silly shows an alternative view on the progression of his career. Generally speaking, his early plays fit the more tried and tested Elizabethan literary conventions. There are his more light-hearted comedies like A Midsummer Night's Dream, or his history plays with fun sidekick characters like Falstaff to complement the serious notes, or his narrative poems retelling classical stories. It's later in his writing career when he goes more experimental with works like Hamlet, King Lear and The Tempest that don't fit literary conventions so well. You can see this progression in Bill, who still has a lot to learn before he becomes the world-class playwright we know him as today. He has the ideas, but he can't necessarily translate them into effective plays. Over the course of the film, he has to learn how to refine his ideas and not to excitedly put them all out there at the same time.
Oh God, I'm dead.
He needs the advice of fellow writer Christopher Marlowe, who tells him he needs to write what he knows and to write from the heart. His adventures through political manoeuvrings and assassination attempts is where, according to the film, Bill gathers inspiration for his most famous lines.
For now I go, and it is done. The bell invites me.
Call out thou. By heaven I charge thee, speak, mark me!
What the hell? What the hell? What the hell?
I could a tale unfold, whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, the foul and most unnatural murder. Oh, villain, smiling, damned villain. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Hell is empty. All the devils are here! Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of men.
Who knew Bill could be such an educational resource about Shakespeare's works? Next time your teacher dusts off an ancient adaptation of a Shakespeare production for your class to watch, ask them to put Bill on instead. But Bill can't refine his writing skills alone. He needs the help of Christopher Marlowe, London's most successful playwright, who he luckily meets in the pub on his first night in the big city. Christopher Marlowe was one of Shakespeare's playwriting contemporaries. He had a relatively short career but produced some works you might have heard of like The Jew of Malta and Dr. Faustus. He was the first to use blank verse to critical acclaim, which of course is a style that Shakespeare is now famous for. But who cares about that stuff? What we really like about Marlowe's work is the same thing that caught the interest of 16th century audiences: the blood and cruelty and violence. Yes, while Shakespeare's plays had a more refined note, contemporary audiences were hungry for slash horror, and Marlowe was happy to provide. Again, we don't know too much about Marlowe's real life, but loads of rumours and suggestions have popped up. Mostly that he was a pub-crawling heretical queer spy who might have been an atheist. He was nearly kicked out of uni because he regularly fails to turn up for anything. But luckily for Marlowe, he had a handy extenuating circumstances form from the government that explained he had been busy dealing with matters touching the benefit of his country. They probably meant he was spying for Queen Elizabeth. So the real Marlowe was a bit more extra than the subdued Marlowe who Bill meets in the pub. There was a not so uncommon trend for writers of this time to die in mysterious and bloody ways, just like their very own characters, and Christopher Marlowe was no exception. He was a subversive figure in Elizabethan society, from his rumoured sexuality to his possible atheism. The story is that he was killed in a pub brawl in 1593. Theories about the circumstances of his death include all the famous courtiers as suspected murderers or orchestrators. Lord Burleigh and Lord Cecil had him off because his play seemed a bit too Catholic. Queen Elizabeth had him killed because he seemed too atheist. Sir Walter Raleigh did it to stop Marlowe incriminating him. The Earl of Essex did it to incriminate Sir Walter Raleigh. He was in a fight over an unpaid bill that got out of control. The poor man just couldn't do anything right here. Chris's story in the film comes to a tragic end too. After Chris betrays Bill by secretly taking the money for his new play, it turns out that he himself has been betrayed. The nice theatre group that wants to buy the play are actually King Philip and his assassins. They kill Chris so he can't tell anyone what happened, but Bill arrives just before he dies to learn the truth and to save the day through the power of words. But not even a small thing like murder will stop Chris's ghost turning up like Hamlet's dad to give Bill a bit of posthumous writing advice. The real Marlowe and Shakespeare had interconnected careers too. Many of Shakespeare's plays are like an answer to Marlowe's. The moral philosophising of good and evil and Dr. Faustus rises again in Shakespeare's Hamlet. So it's a smart move for the film to make Chris into Bill's writing mentor. Although the film doesn't keep strictly to the real Marlowe's life, the closing of the playhouses was a setback, but it didn't grind his writing career to a halt. It still leaves in just enough historical homages to make any literary scholar chuckle, and I think anyone can appreciate Bill and Chris reacting to each other's very different writing styles.
So, what sort of stuff do you write, Chris?
Drama, tragedies, tales of betrayal and revenge. You?
Bum jokes.
Now, who is this King Philip II of Spain who has been causing all the trouble? Well, he's the same guy from the Spanish Armada. You know, the thing that Queen Elizabeth I is famous for, where she rallies up a fleet of ships to stop the oncoming Spanish invasion, and they all retreat with their tails between their legs. That guy. In Bill, he's the exaggerated pantomime villain who wants nothing more than to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I, claim England, and convert it to Catholicism. The Six Idiots even admit he is the character they researched the least, and it comes across pretty obviously that he's a caricature. The real Philip had a slightly more nuanced foreign policy with England. His second wife was Queen Mary of England, Elizabeth's older sister. He supported Mary Queen of Scots as a Catholic monarch, and he attempted some more armadas. And as far as I know, he never infiltrated the Elizabethan court with his assassins disguised as an upstart theatre group. He was also actually in his 60s when the film takes place, so not so much the macho king that all the ladies are thirsty for. Because it's so obvious that the film's Philip is all made up, the historical humour comes from elsewhere. His secret Catholic headquarters is hidden under none other than the Protestant heart of England, Westminster Abbey. Wait, isn't that York Minster? Well, never mind, it's just a film set. In true irony, the secret base is decked out like Churchill's war rooms, where Phil and his gang are all prepared to concoct their genius plans to seize the throne. Unfortunately for Phil, Lizzie is no stranger to plots against her, and she has some tricks up her puff sleeves to sabotage all attempts. Her trump card is Sir Francis Walsingham, Spymaster, who can sniff out a Catholic plot from 100 miles away. That he sniffs the wrong way and falsely accuses the wrong man, our very own Bill Shakespeare, isn't relevant here. You have to give him some credit because, well, he did die 3 years before, in 1590. After framing Mary Queen of Scots and foiling the Spanish Armada, he died a pretty regular death, probably of cancer or maybe kidney stones. Christopher Marlowe would be jealous. So why is he turning up in our films set in 1592 and 3? Well, such a prolific spymaster surely couldn't have died such a normal person death. According to the film Bill, he faked his own death to better position himself as an undercover spy. Now that's a genius plan Phil and his cronies are looking for. As for Elizabeth, how is the big lady herself portrayed? Well, like Philip II of Spain, she was also in her 60s in the 1590s, but unlike Bill, Lizzie is actually shown as her age, even if maybe an exaggerated version. Rather than the young queen portrayed in other historical films, she is old and worn and a bit tired of still having to deal with this queenship business. The real Elizabeth I is known for her use of clothes and makeup to fashion herself as powerful and authoritative, transforming her signs of aging into something ethereal. How successful she was is maybe something only those who were there would know. In the film, Elizabeth is seen with and without her full dress, and we can see the contrast. She knows she has to deal diplomatically with Sir Richard Hawkins kidnapped by King Philip, but wants to do something a bit more pleasant while she's at her duties. How about a nice play written by one of her own upstart courtiers? And who is the courtier in question? Well, none other than the Earl of Crawley, CROYDON. He's one of the lesser courtiers, but is trying to put himself in the spotlight, which is an ambition that in a drunken debacle leads to Queen Elizabeth tasking him with writing a play for the Spanish court. Unfortunately, writing isn't as easy as it seems, and so CROYDON finds himself involved in the assassination plot. But it's okay because he'll get Devon out of it.
Enter our hero. Let's call him Hero. Blah, blah, blah. Ooh, God, writing's hard.
The Earl of Croydon represents all the lesser nobles confined to the corners of history books. For every Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Robert Cecil, there are 10 nobles whose names are too similar to remember. I definitely relate to not being able to keep track of all the members of the royal court and all their fleeting political ambitions across the centuries. And finally, let's talk about the lady of the Six Idiots, Martha Howe Douglas, who plays Bill's wife Anne Hathaway. You might know Anne as the subject of Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, one of Shakespeare's love sonnets. Anne Hathaway grew up in a farmhouse in Stratford and her family were successful sheep farmers. She and William Shakespeare seem to have had a positive relationship, judging by all the love poetry. But other than that, she's a mysterious figure. This really is becoming a running theme in this video. In all adaptations of Shakespeare's life, she makes an appearance, whether as part of a loving marriage or as part of a cold one. In Bill, there is some relationship troubles between the two. Mostly that Anne is worried that Bill's latest venture in the writing world won't support the family. A valid concern. The biggest thing the film adds to its version of Anne Hathaway is her role in kickstarting Bill's writing career. She is the one who suggests to the Earl of Croydon that her husband has written a play which he could use to get around his writer's block. Bill might be a talented writer, but he still needs the help and support of his friend Chris and his wife Anne before he can make his big break. What a wholesome message. From Shakespeare's lost years to the circumstances of Christopher Marlowe's death, to Anne Hathaway's involvement in her husband's writing career, There is so much about the late 16th century playwriting scene that's been lost to time, so instead we have the 6 idiots filling in these unknown parts of history with wit and humour. It can't be inaccurate because no one knows what happened, and because no one knows what happened, it's easy to identify that this is a made-up story. This is Bill Shakespeare the character, and here is his silly story about that time he helped to foil an assassination plot. And as could be expected from a film about a literary figure written by a bunch of people who went to drama school, it's full of literary references and twists on reality to make you smile. But the obvious comedy and caricatures make it pretty clear where the history stops and the story begins. And I would argue it does that more effectively than some seriously written and meticulously researched historical films, where it's possible to assume every aspect is accurate. As Greg Jenner, chief nerd for the Horrible Histories series, says, historical jokes can help you laugh yourself smart. So maybe the 6 idiots are onto something with their silly approach to historical film.
Have you settled on a title?
How about a series of comedy errors?
That's getting there.